A few months ago, I had put the topic of the Sales History podcast out to LinkedIn and asked for ideas of things that you wanted me to research and look into. And I got one that I thought was really good. From a guy named Ryan Cobb, he asked, what is the history of the ideal sales candidate? What sort of character traits were sought out in the old days versus now? So, this episode is a listener-inspired one, so please keep them coming. Today, episode number 51, we explore sales recruiting from 1900 to the 1950s. What was the profile of an ideal candidate, and how did organizations go about finding them?
There is nothing new in the world of sales, except for the history you do not know. Welcome to the Sales History Podcast, bringing the brilliant and sometimes strange minds, methods, and ideas from the sales profession's past with applications to today. Here is your host, the best-selling author of 2 books with a third coming in January of 2026, CSP speaker, trainer, and nerd, Todd Caponi.
The selling force is the fighting factor, the militia of every house. It establishes the outposts of industry. It gains new ground to build up strength and stability. It guards from threat and failures the stronghold of success. That was a quote from Walter Cottingham in 1908, he of the Sherwin-Williams Company, which you probably are familiar with today. Now, while not a whole lot has changed in terms of what sales leaders thought about the traits of a great salesperson, their perspectives and quotes are profound and powerful. So today, let's explore some of those thoughts. But buckle up, because along the way, I'll point out the differences, things that in most cases would be off limits in today's world. Going back to that first quote from Cottingham in 1908, it described the sentiment. The salesperson is the militia, and when sales stops, so does everything else. He had added that business is warfare. It is hard, constant fight to finish. The moment a contestant enters the field, he is challenged by a host of competitors. And in a similar way, John G. Jones wrote in his 1930 edition of the book Sales Management. Now, mind you, he may have written this much earlier. My edition just happens to be from 1930. He said that, quote, the salesman is an ambassador of the company. Often to many customers and prospective customers, he is the company. Their impression of the company is their impression of the salesman. So thinking about that, the early 1900s, you didn't have television ads, you didn't have social media. Really, the salesperson was even more important back then as they are today. So to start, let's go back to 1908 when Cottingham was making his statements and lay the foundation for what makes a great salesperson. You'll probably notice that you likely will agree with most of this, and in most cases, it's better said than today. In 1908, the Dictaphone Company of America, their sales manager, a guy named J.W. Binder, summarized his thoughts well. He started by saying that the essential factors of salesmanship are 2, knowledge and confidence. But he added these important questions, which I can't imagine anyone today would disagree with. Again, this is 1908. He said, first, are you courageous? Are you persistent? Do you have that faculty of taking hold of a thing and sticking to it until it is finished? Do you have that quality of initiative? If you have not these qualities, cultivate them. Without them, you will not amount to a very great deal. A second point, are you truthful? By this, I mean not according to the tenets of common honesty, but are you truthful with yourself? Look into this matter carefully, and if you are not, cultivate absolute truthfulness. George Larimer, also in 1908, added, quote, a real salesman is 1 part talk and 9 parts judgment, and uses the 9 parts of judgment to tell when to use the 1 part of talk. Really well said. Moving ahead into the 1920s, the St. Louis Chamber of Commerce sent a questionnaire to their 360 sales manager members. The subject? What were the qualifications for selecting salespeople? They published something called, quote, the compendium of the 12 essential qualifications of a salesman. And again, you'd probably agree with all of these. Number 1 was good character. 2, personality. 3, health. 4, mentality. 5, concentration. 6, industry. 7, self-confidence. 8, punctuality. 9, tact. 10, initiative. 11, resourcefulness. And 12, knowledge of goods. I mean, check the box on all of these, right? No changes here. Now, going back to John G. Jones in that 1930 edition of Sales Management magazine by the Alexander Hamilton Institute, he wrote that success in selling equals 2 parts personality and 1 part brains. Then he discussed specific nuances of things like experience. So here's where we go. He wrote, quote, some sales managers prefer inexperienced men who otherwise meet certain qualifications. The inexperienced man usually brings with him no previously gained bias or prejudice. It was believed that oftentimes when salespeople were hired, quote, young and fresh from school, they are more easily managed because they are coming from the discipline of the educational environment. They are assumed to be accustomed to taking orders and learning from superiors. In other words, the feeling that these individuals can be taught to execute in the field in the way the managers want them to is more likely. He goes on to say, quote, on the other hand, when individuals have a considerable amount of experience, they don't need to be taught from scratch. While they likely will have some things that have to be unlearned, they may likely be much stronger in their abilities, which could be required to open a new market or battle in a heavily competitive market. In those cases, quote, once it is established that the new product is acceptable and desirable there, new men may be able to hold the trade. So there we go. All of that so far sounds an awful lot like today. Same considerations, same trade, same mindset. Now, there was a couple of interesting takes here. So one of the things was about having stars on the team or individuals with a fantastic reputation of success. Some sales managers at the time wanted what they called pace setters on their team, the superstars. But in what I find kind of funny, these individuals clearly were considered divas as well. Quote, the star is likely to have a flair for one-way cooperation. The company must do everything for him and make allowance for all his eccentricities. He is prone to consider himself a privileged character, not subject to rules and regulations. He may want a better delivery schedule and the best credit terms for his customers. Reporting to the main office may just be a nuisance for him. Cultivating modest but potentially good customers he may think is a waste of time. Now, however, in an article from the November of 1924 edition of Sales Management magazine, the writer, anonymous, actually it says the sales manager astronomer, says about the stargazer, quote, the average sales manager has about as much spine as a plate of raspberry jello. Oh, well said. The article spoke of the sales manager who would, quote, settle back cowed in his chair and weakly reply, take a handful of cigars out of my humidor and draw up in detail just what you want and how. I'll sign it with my eyes closed, thinking that hiring stars was the easy way out. Everything sounds just as it would today. Regarding the thoughts of who you would have to sell to, quote, purchases of this sort are of such size and importance that they are made by reasonable, responsible, and rather high executives in the particular organization approached. And men of such caliber will not listen to the sales talk of callow youngsters. Now, let's get into some of the weirder qualifications, because you probably are right with me so far. Jones discussed things that played a role in hiring. Miscellaneous special qualifications, where he says these qualifications have often been arbitrary. The first, men over 40 have not sufficient initiative to make good on his particular job. So that's a quote men over 40. There's also another one. They believe that unmarried men are not possessed of sufficient stability to fill the bill successfully. These were often set up company by company as the result of their collection of records matched up against certain traits. In 1924, the Phoenix Mutual Life Insurance Company qualifications, which were normal until the last one. So the first one, though, is a little bit off. It says age limit. You've got to be between the age of 24 and 38. So ageism, no problem back then, right? Number 2 was college experience preferred. Number 3, previous selling experience preferred. Number 4, men without previous insurance experience preferred. But number 5, rarely do men make a success in our business if in debt. So if they had debt, they didn't want them. And they somehow had a way to find that out. Back then, they could and did ask just about anything, including all sorts of information about your parents and their occupations, your religion, whether you spent your childhood in a city or on a farm, etc. In a 1922 edition of Sales Management magazine, it discussed how, quote, a well-known insurance company discovered by a careful study of records that success in its sales force was most likely to come from men possessing the following qualities. Number 1 is they should be from the age of 33 to 38 years old. So that's very tight. Number 2 for them was they should be married. So unmarried, no thanks. Number 3, they should have 2 or more dependents. Number 4 is they should have grammar in high school, but no college education. Very interesting, especially given the times today. Number 5, they should have been out of school more than 9 years and have had more than 6 years of experience. The next one, they should hold membership in 5 or more organizations. Number 7, they should own their own homes. And finally, number 8, they should have 3 or more investments besides life insurance. So these are oddly particular, aren't they? So like I said, it was organization by organization, very specific to what they were selling. For example, there was an organization who sold pencils to large organizations. Imagine that's what you were selling today. And these organizations, they would buy a year's supply at a time. So they decided that their salespeople should be over 40 years of age, with more than usual education and of some experience. Again, company by company. Applications at the time had extensive requirements to provide information on your physical record, including your age, your height, your weight, your skin, your eyes, your hair color, listing of any defects, whether it be speech, hearing, sight, your feet. It also asked when you had a last physical, why you had it, did you pass, and how many days you had lost through illness in the past 2 years. You had to often submit to be willing to have the company give you a physical examination. C.H. Russell, who was addressing the Salesmanship Club of Wichita on the topic of the selection of salesmen in 1917, laid a big head scratcher on the group. Here's a fun one. So here we go. He said, quote, if any salesman has a nagging wife, I don't want him, because sooner or later she is going to get his goat. He is going to lose his intuition. He is going to be down and out so far as being a keen, eager salesman. Neither do I want a salesman whose wife is a spendthrift, because many salesmen have come up short because they couldn't keep up with the extraordinary expense at home. I like to have a salesman who has a wife who believes in building a home. When you find that kind of man, a man with a helpmate, you can count on his having 50 or 100% more chances to make good than the man with the nagging wife or the spendthrift. Like I said, this was a speech that was given to the Salesmanship Club of Wichita in 1917. And he's talking about this, and I'm thinking to myself, I've got to read the Q&A portion of the program. There was a couple of interesting ones that you probably at least have one of these, but one of them was he was asked about the single man. He replied that, quote, especially it is true in territories where a man must be away from home for a length of time. In that case, I always choose a single man because it has been my experience that it is not well to send a married man on longer than 2 weeks' territory. That's cool, very thoughtful. But then the next question is, how about figuring out whether a man has a nagging or a spendthrift wife? He replied, quote, oftentimes by sending someone to the neighborhood to find out from the next door neighbor, following, if you please, the plan that is pursued very largely at present by one of the most successful automobile manufacturers in the world. Imagine that. Company is considering hiring you for a sales role in their company, and they essentially send out a spy ahead to investigate, and he's saying one of the biggest automobile manufacturers already does that. So this isn't new. In 1927, Cunliffe L. Bowling wrote in his book, Sales Management, about salespeople and their weight, their height, and the relationship between the two. He said, quote, there is an old saying, fat men make the best salesmen, and some sales managers will, perhaps subconsciously, choose a fat man in preference to a thin one when all points are equal. He went on to say that, quote, some sales managers go farther into the matter of psychology and say that short, fat men are more assertive and self-confident than tall, thin ones. If that latter can be condemned as retiring and self-conscious, they certainly are less suitable for the road. But Boiling saved himself from going down a super weird hole through this explanation. Quote, such sweeping generalities are dangerous, but salesmanship is no exact science. In engaging a salesman, the sales manager should ask himself, quote, if I were a buyer, would this man make a good impression upon me? Would I be prepared to act on his advice? What class of business does he seem most suited to represent? So that's a great way to sum up that part. Now let's move on to another topic here. I want to talk quickly about an article I read from 1922 in Sales Management that declared that out of 2,347 salesmen employed by leading concerns in 27 lines of business during the year 1921, 1,482 of them have already failed. Now, this was a period called the Forgotten Depression of the early 1920s. You always hear about the Great Depression, but there was another depression that took place about 10 years earlier. It goes on to say that this is 63%, nearly 2 men failing for every one who had made good. And what this article attempted to vet out was the causes of failure. And they, across the board, said number one was something they referred to as lack of industry. They said that that contributed to 37% of the reason why people fail. So what is lack of industry? I dug in further. It meant work ethic, initiative, tenacity, follow through. In other words, the number one reason for failure was just a lack of putting in the work according to their studies. At the time, there was another 37%, which was a tie for number one, which was discouragement. So people just getting down based on that economy and how tough it was to sell. The rest of the things were like failure to follow instructions, lack of knowledge, dishonesty, or in some cases, poor health. It went on to say that, quote, these studies showed indisputably that the differences between individual sales totals are almost entirely due to hard work. That was by Winslow Russell, vice president of the Phoenix Mutual Life Insurance Company in 1922. So the question that commonly gets asked now is, what about this old adage that salespeople are extroverts and they should be extroverts? Well, we've known from at least 1947 and specifically in 1952 that that's not the case. It's from an article called Salespeople Are Extroverts Not from 1952. It's called Salesmen of the Future. And it says, there is a hoary old adage lying around here somewhere that says all good salesmen are extroverts. Like most other generalizations, there's undoubtedly a large measure of truth to it, but if we continue to accept it at face value as a hiring philosophy, I think it's likely to become more and more misleading. At the time, they went on to say that as selling moves further and further in the direction of becoming a service profession, as we've talked about in previous episodes, that's what it used to be, and we got away from it. But they go on to say, I believe our specifications for good sales personality are likely to undergo progressive change. The new salesman will have more of the student and teacher in him. He will have more of the analyst in him. He will have infinitely more patience than the old-time salesmen ever have. His attitude towards his job will be different. It goes on to say, I continue to observe case after case of individual successful salesmen where the men are not what is commonly described as the sales type. That sound familiar, right? That's no surprises there. And then Edward C. Bursk had talked about this in a Sales Management magazine article a few years earlier in 1947 when he said, quote, indeed, many sales managers have already found that the ambivert, or even the near introvert, is likely to be more successful than the extrovert. So with that, let's put a little bow on this. One other piece from the 1920s that sounds so familiar is this idea that came from the Dartnell Corporation in the 1920s, who, when they would ask somebody to fill out an application, one of the things that was really important was they wanted to know whether the individuals were merely, quote, trying to land the job on impulse because they think there's big money in it, or whether they have actually considered the situation and have reasoned out what the firm offers as opportunities and whether they are particularly adapted to take advantage of them. So, gosh, it sounds like today and it's 100 years ago. So, one last little piece here that I think is so funny is a article that came out from Martin J. McHugh. He was the Philadelphia branch manager of a company called the Clary Multiplier Corporation in 1952. He said 9 traits for what top salesmen have. A couple of these cracked me up. Number 1 was the curiosity of a cat. Number 2 was the tenacity of a bulldog. Number 3, the diplomacy of a wayward husband. I don't know what that one means, but okay. Number 4, the patience of a self-sacrificing wife. Number 5, the enthusiasm of a flapper. Okay. Number 6, the friendliness of a child. Number 7, hope that I've got this one, the good humor of an idiot. Number 8, the assurance of a college boy. And number 9, the tireless energy of a bill collector. So let's part with this quote from 1940, C.L. Shartle, American Management Association, Marketing Series number 39. He said this, and I cannot believe that this is not exactly what we hear today. He said, quote, we have studied 20,000 occupations, and we find that the difficulty encountered in devising improved selection techniques for sales work is probably not equaled in any other group of occupations. That's the truth. Even as a multi-time sales leader, interviewed and hired lots of salespeople, I can't imagine any more difficult task than trying to identify and nail those best candidates. They knew it in 1940 and we know it today. So, did you hear anything today that surprised you? Again, most of it sounds an awful lot like today, but in many cases, there's some things that are off limits around the size, your shape, your age, your marital status, even how much debt you had. So, as always, love your feedback. Love that you spent the time listening in. And as this episode is a point to, if you've got ideas that you want me to research, I'd love that. Created another episode, and I really had some fun digging into this one. So until next time, thanks again, as always, for listening.